Okay. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are going to get started here as more people start to trickle in.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everybody. If you could kindly put like your name in the chat or just say something so we know you're here, that would be great. Also, any questions that you have, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Sergio Prieto. I am with MG West, Hayworth Furniture Dealer in San Francisco. Thank you for joining. I am part of the San Francisco City Center as professional development, which is why we're here with this today. Thanks for joining the NCIDQ info session. Part of your membership, IIDA membership, helps us support such events like this, so keep it coming. And I'm going to turn it over to Adam Newton to say a few words, and then we'll get started. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sergio. My name is Adam Newton. I'm a job captain and designer at Smith Karn Architecture in San Francisco, and I am the advocacy chair for the IIDA San Francisco City Center. We're really glad to have you here today. We're just going to jump right in and keep this casual. Like Sergio said, if you have any questions, either put them in the Q&A section or just in the chat. There's a, it's casual enough here, and there's a small enough number of people where we can monitor both and keep this casual. So without further ado, our presenter today leading us through this course is Laura Taylor. She is a designer at ASD Sky here in San Francisco, and also the VP of Advocacy for the Northern California chapter of IIDA. We are so happy to have her here. She's so awesome in doing this for us. Do you want to kick it off, Laura?
Yeah, thank you for that intro. You're so kind.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So welcome, everybody. I just asked in the chat for people to tell us where you are, because we're all kind of in different locations maybe than we normally are, since we live in this panorama, this pandemic. So yeah, let us know. That's kind of fun. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can get started. So you guys see that?
Yep.
Awesome. So thank you, Adam and Sergio. I'm really excited to be here to present this to you guys. Like Adam said, I'm a designer and also super involved in IIDA in a lot of different respects, but this is one of my favorite things I get to do, which is to talk about the NCIDQ. Like Adam mentioned, this can be really casual. We usually do this in person, and it's so much fun just to, like, kind of rattle ideas off and have people interrupt and raise their hands and stuff. So this is a very low pressure, no pressure, just info session, no dumb questions. We assume everybody here is at different levels of experience with the NCIDQ. Maybe you've taken an exam, maybe you're brand new to this. Maybe you're thinking about, like, gee, I might take that in 3 years and I just want to get an idea about it. So all questions welcome. The biggest reason we started doing this info session is I passed the NCIDQ about 4 years ago, and I felt like the hardest thing, like, you learn all the content, and all the content is a lot of work, but the hardest thing is just like wrapping your mind around, like, what is this exam? Like, who takes it? And I found myself through the whole process being like, God, I wonder what other people are doing. Like, is this normal? Am I doing it right? Just learning how to take the test is like a whole process in and of itself. So hopefully this just passes on some of the knowledge that, like, I gained after I finished it. I'm never going to use this knowledge again for myself. So hopefully it can get passed on to some of you. So we're going to go through a few kind of big buckets of information. So we'll do an overview of the exam, and then we'll talk about the process of the exam, which I think is one of the more cloudy parts for most people. We're going to talk about resources for studying, which is like the hottest topic. And then we're going to cover some like easy action items, and then talk about like why the value of the test really matters at all, which is hopefully not new information, but the information that will help you like remain inspired to get going. So NCIDQ is a mouthful of an acronym, but it stands for National Council of Interior Design Qualification, and that's what the exam is called. But the council itself is now, they dropped the N a few years ago, so the council that administers it is just the Council for Interior Design Qualification. And part of that is because it's also a prolific exam in Canada, and it's now available in French because it's the official exam for Canada. So they dropped the national since it's technically international. So it's made up of 3 tests. They're administered every April and October. We get a ton of questions about why it's not offered more frequently. It's like the ARE exams are. For now, it's only available in April and October, and CIDQ has said there is no plan to change that. So April's coming up. Maybe some of you have already applied or registered for an exam in April. There's 3 exams, the FX, the PX, well, IDFX, IDPX, and the PRAC, which stands for Practicum. So the IDFX is the fundamentals exam. It's 125 questions, and you have 3 hours for it. The PX is the same format, but it's 175 questions, which is like, oh my God, such a long test. And you have, actually, I maybe think this is a typo. I think you maybe actually have 4 hours. Maybe somebody can confirm that for us. And then the Practicum, which is, there's a new version. It's a few years old now, so we don't really call it the new version anymore, but it is 120 questions on the computer. The format is like what they call hotspot, fill in the blank, drag and place, kind of interactive computer test. That is a 4-hour exam. And the big picture for timeline is that you have 5 years or 10 cycles to complete all 3 of these exams, and that starts when you begin applying. So if you wait 6 years to finish your exams, you'll start to lose, you know, the credit that you gained in the first few. So you need to take them all within 5 years. These are the pass rates for CIDA accredited programs, just because they track those. And I like to show this because I think most people probably have a sense that the Practicum is the hardest exam. Because it is a little bit different than the other 2, like multiple choice is kind of accessible, like we all know what that entails. The lowest pass rate, and this has been consistent, these shift around, actually the Practicum is a little higher in 2020 than it typically is, but the IDPX is always the lowest pass rate. I think that's because it's a super long test, 175 questions. Most people feel like it's kind of an extension of the IDFX, which it is in some ways, but there's a lot of new content in this one. So just to keep in mind, this is the test that historically people are like underprepared for. And the Practicum is not as scary as it might seem. So we're going to talk about the process of how you begin to go about taking all of these exams. So it comes down to 5 steps: apply, purchase, schedule, test, and then the 3 R's: results, reimbursement, and renewal. So I always recommend to try to take the exams in order. The biggest thing is to take the IDFX first. It can be taken without prior work experience, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But you know, the IDPX and the Practicum, people take those out of order often, but I always recommend people really start with the IDFX exam. And the way that you ultimately take the exam is at a Prometric testing center. These are all over the US. It's a third-party company. If you've ever, if you've known anyone who's like an accountant or anything like that, a lot of people take these standardized professional tests at a Prometric center. So application. So the application for the April exams is already closed. I'm sorry if that's news to you. The application for the next session is always open. So you can apply now for the October exams all the way through July 31st. And there's a few things that you do in that application process. First of all, you pay a fee. This is where you start shelling out the big cash for NCIDQ. But it's $225 if you apply for all 3 exams at once, and then it's $95 for the IDFX and $145 for the other 2 if you do them separately. So it's just like $15 more expensive. The reason you might do them separately is because if you don't have the work experience yet, you only qualify to apply for the IDFX. If you already have the work experience, there's no reason not to apply for all 3 exams at the same time. You do all this applying in your My NCIDQ account, which we'll look at in a little bit. And then you have to provide your education through an official transcript. So during COVID, they really started recommending that people do the email transcript. So your institution, your university will email the transcript to CIDQ. This is not like you sending a PDF in an email. It's an official transcript, so it has to come from the organization. You can also mail it to them, and there's information about that on the website, but I don't think, you know, that is possibly easier than just emailing it. So highly recommend that. You also have to prove your work experience by uploading your work experience form, which we will also take a look at in a minute. That is just a PDF upload to your My NCIDQ account. And then you'll get an email saying like your application has been approved from CIDQ. I want to mention something I'm going to bring up a lot during this session is to find out if your firm will pay for these exams either now or later. Some of you might be, you know, taking this exam to increase your hireability, and you're not working for a firm right now, and that's okay. But for most large firms and even some small firms, they will reimburse you for this exam. So lots of them won't reimburse you until you're finished, and they'll kind of pay you one lump sum. But if they're going to reimburse you along the way, like paying for your application is the first step that you could be reimbursed for. So I'll keep mentioning that. This is an example of, this is on the CIDQ website, the eligibility path. So what this means is depending on what kind of degree you have, you fall into different requirements for the work experience to qualify for the exam. If you've graduated from an interior design degree, that's a 4-year degree, you have the shortest amount of time, it's 2 years of work experience. If you have an associate degree or you studied architecture instead, you have a 3-year experience. And then the 4-year experience, I think basically applies to like unusual circumstances. So this gives you a sense of if you're kind of planning out when you're going to take these exams, how many years of work experience you'll need before you qualify. Like I said, you can qualify for the IDFX with just your education. You don't need any work experience. So who can be a work experience supervisor? So the person who signs off on your work experience needs to be a direct supervisor or a sponsor. I think most people probably do the direct supervisor. The sponsor is basically if you work in like a really unusual circumstances, you don't work with somebody directly, they can, somebody from a different organization can sponsor you. They need to be either an NCIDQ certified interior designer, a state or provincial licensed, registered, or certified interior designer. So if a state like has, for example, like in Nevada, you can be a licensed interior designer in the state of Nevada, that would count. Or you need to be a licensed or registered architect who provides interior design services. So that's important. I don't know, how they're really verifying this information, but if you work for an architect and they're signing off on your work experience, they should be working within the interior design scope. Lastly, this ARP button on the website is an important one if you just don't meet like the eligibility path described here, or if you have kind of a special circumstance. So like the first time we did this session, somebody was like, what if you have a degree in journalism, but you've been doing interior design for 15 years? And I was like, alternate review process. Or what if I got my degree in Saudi Arabia and then did half my work in Beijing and then moved to the US, like alternate review process. So I haven't been through that myself. My situation was pretty standard, but I've heard that, they're very responsive to these kind of alternate review paths, and they will provide you the outline of what you need to do to be able to apply. So this is the work experience form. This is the whole thing. It's just 2 pages. The biggest thing about this is your supervisor has to fill out section 2. So you'll just need to like get on their calendar to, provide all this information at some point. And like I said, it does show either your certificate number or your license number that they need to provide. So once you've done all your application stuff, you've been approved, your next step is to purchase the exam. So this is a longer window. You can purchase the exam all the way up until the day before the exam window. So right now, if you're interested in taking the exam in April and you have already had your application approved, you can purchase the test up until the 31st. The purchasing period for fall is also open starting in July through September 30th. So it's a pretty long window. This is where you, again, start to shell out the big bucks. So these are the purchasing prices for when you actually sit down and say, I'm scheduling that I'm going to commit to take this test this session. You don't ever purchase for future sessions. You only purchase for the upcoming session. So like I said, kind of big numbers here. The NCIDQ costs a minimum of $1,335. You do all of that purchasing in your My NCIDQ account. Again, maybe your firm will pay for that. And then you schedule through the Prometric testing site. So the way that works is CIDQ will give you a number, and then you go to the Prometric site and put in the number, and it allows you to schedule your exam. The reason they do that is because you are going to choose what Prometric you take the exam at. And I really highly recommend that you purchase early on in this window, because slots will start to fill up, and you can imagine what people sign up for. So like the first week of the exam is like the last thing to fill up. Nobody wants to take it on the first day of the window. They want like a few extra weeks of studying time. So if you have a specific, maybe you want to take 2 exams and you want to spread them out over the course of 3 weeks. If you have to take them on a Saturday, things like that. If you have any specific requirements like that, you really want to get in early, because those slots will start to fill up. Good question. I just saw this come through about our Prometric testing sites operating currently. So they are. Adam actually has been to a few exam sessions during this pandemic. It depends on where you are. So, you know, if you're in a different state, for example, like that might be affected, you should absolutely check out your local areas. The other thing is that NCIDQ is offering a rollover. This is unusual. Usually if you have to reschedule your exam, they charge you a fee for it, or if you need to cancel, they charge you a fee. That's why the cost is minimum, because you might add on some costs if you're rescheduling. But what they're doing right now is saying, if you plan to take this test in the spring, and for some reason you feel uncomfortable doing that, either because you think you've been exposed or you're recovering and you're sick, you can roll over that exam and the purchase price to the fall for no extra fee. You do have to go to CIDQ.org/COVID-19 response. They have a form there that you have to fill out to get that rolled over. But it sounds like they're being really accommodating.
I can confirm. I know for sure the San Francisco and Alameda sites are open with COVID restrictions in place. You have to wear the mask the whole time, and they separate you 6-foot distance, and then they have pretty rigorous cleaning procedures for like the mouse and the keyboard and everything. Oh, and there's also a running list on Prometric's website that's really easy just to Google that will tell you if your nearby center is open or closed.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so then the really fun part is you take the test. Again, in the spring, it's the month of April. In the fall, it's the month of October. And again, it is going to be that for the foreseeable future. CIDQ has said they would need a ton more demand, like a lot more people taking the exam to justify doing it all year round, because they would have to come up with like 3 times the amount of questions. Like they'd have to increase their question bank so that people aren't having all the same questions all the time. And they just don't have the demand for that. So it'll be in these 2 time slots for the foreseeable future. Also, you should check to see if your firm offers paid time off for professional exams. I know when I took the exam, I got 8 hours for each section. And that's really helpful. You can either use that for studying time, or you can use that on the day of the exam if you have to take it on a weekday, for example. You can also apply for NCIDQ tuition reimbursement through IIDA headquarters. They give a handful of these every year. So after you're all done taking them and you've passed all of them, If you had no other way to get financial support for this exam, you can apply for this, and they do reimburse in full the cost of the NCIDQ for a handful of people every year. Okay, finally, your results. So the IDFX and the IDPX have a same-day tentative pass or fail via email. I think that comes in about an hour after your test is over. And they have said that this is very accurate. So if you get a likely pass, you can feel really confident that you have passed. I don't think, basically they were saying that is never different than what the final result is. And then your official results come via email and through your My NCIDQ account 6 to 8 weeks after the testing period. In my experience, the practicum, so that you don't get a tentative score for the practicum, so you have to like wait on that. But I believe that it's been closer to the 6 weeks than the 8 weeks for people in the last few sessions. Then you get to either get a reimbursement or sometimes a bonus for your firm, a bonus if you're licensed. And then you have to pay a $75 annual renewal fee to CIDQ. And if you let that lapse, they charge you extra when you reinstate it. So it's an easy thing. They'll remind you every year to just pay them for it. Again, your firm might pay for that, mine does. And then it's appellation time, which if you've never heard that word, that's totally fine. Appellations are what people put after their name, where they're like, you know, dentists say like DDS. Not anyone can do that. You have to have, you know, proven that you're qualified for that to add that to your name. So when people say NCIDQ at the end of their, you know, name on an email signature or something, they usually include the certificate number. It also means that you're an official professional member of IIDA and not just an associate member. And then, yeah, plaster this baby all over like your LinkedIn, put it on your business card, shout it from the rooftops. This is an example of that tentative pass-fail email. That's kind of what it looks like. So it shows you where you landed in all of the content sections for the exam, and it'll give you this big fat green check mark, hopefully. Okay, we're going to talk about resources. So like I said, this is like the most controversial hot button part of the presentation, because I wish there were easy answers, but there just aren't. It's a little bit complicated. So I put together my kind of list of like key resources, things that I think everybody should be using. Again, your firm might have like copies of these textbooks and things. If they don't, find out if they'll provide them. So CIDQ.org is the main website, and I have to say it's a really good website. I'm going to open it real quick. Hopefully you guys can see that. It's a really good website. These two tabs are basically where all your information that you're going to be looking for is. Check this out all the time. The second thing is your My NCIDQ account, which you click on right here. And this is where you log in to upload your forms, do all of that stuff. I like to include
Laura,
this Facebook.
if you're on the screen, we can't see it.
Oh, shoot. Do you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm just not able to show you the website tabs, but I think that's probably fine. We're going to share this presentation, and these are all hyperlinked, so folks can check it out. The Facebook group. So this I didn't discover until I was almost done with the exam. For those moments where you're just like, what the hell are other people doing? I'm really confused by this. This is a really good place just to like throw out questions. It's really active. There's people on there all the time from all over the country. It is a closed group, so you have to like request access to it. So plan a few days for somebody to like accept you into that group. It's also had a few issues with people like sharing study materials that should not be shared. So caution around like uploading pictures of like practice exams or anything like that. The ballast books. So this is the main textbook. It's like a honkin' like 400-page textbook that the exam is based on. Everybody should be reading that. They also come with sample questions, supplemental booklets that have, like sample questions and practice exams. I found those super helpful. If you have this book and the sample questions and practice exams, that might be all that you need to study for this exam. I'm going to come back to the building codes in a second. The last thing I highly recommend is Quizlet for flashcards. So I use this to make my own flashcards because for like a lot of people, like making the flashcards is a study process in and of itself, but there are also tons of NCIDQ flashcards from other people on that site. So when you've done yours a bunch and you're kind of over them, you can search for NCIDQ on that platform, find other people's flashcards, and just kind of like test yourself on some new, slightly reworded content, I think is really helpful. So the IBC building codes, let me see if I can reshare so that I can share that page. Okay, can you see my web browser now?
Yep.
Awesome. So this is the biggest change this year. And I wish I had more to tell you about it, but no one's ever taken it this way. So you guys are the guinea pigs. So starting for the spring of 2021, the Practicum exam codes are based on the International Building Code. In the past, NCIDQ did something called Q codes, where they kind of took all the information from the IBC that would be needed for the exam and put it into like one little PDF for everybody to study from. It was really helpful because all the information was in one place, but they, I think, kind of realized that it looked to outsiders like they were making up codes to be used in this exam. They're not making up codes, they were pulling it from the International Building Code, but it is it helps with the rigor and the reputation of the exam if they're literally just referencing the International Building Codes and not like recompiling that for people to study from. So it's good and bad. The good part is it helps with the reputation of the exam and the rigor. The bad part is it's a little bit harder to find when you're studying. So they put together this table of contents. These are all the sections that are needed to be able to successfully take the practicum exam. All of this stuff is referenced in the ballast books, but the specific numbers, for example, like the amount of hours for fire barriers and partitions, things like that, should be found in the International Building Code. What I do know, you can see it's kind of long, and these links basically take you to like a code website that if you don't have an account for, you can't really see them. Hopefully you have a way to search for codes either on the internet through like UpCodes, or maybe you have a code book in your office. They will still provide you that like one-page PDF of codes during the exam for you to reference. They're just not going to give it to you in advance. That's what I can tell from this. So you can see right here that it says the building code document will be provided as part of the case study for each question that's in the practicum. This document should help you narrow down what you should familiarize yourself with before the exam. And each case study in the practicum has, only uses some code documents, and they will only give you the code documents that are applicable to that case study. So they will help you narrow it down during the exam. I wish I had more kind of insight to give you on that, but because this is the first time they've ever done that, all the information I have is what CIDQ has provided. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. This shoddy image is in the ballast book. One of the helpful things, they have like table of contents and all that stuff, but this is called the study schedule page. And this is really helpful because it breaks down within each chapter what content applies to which exam. So you can see like the IDFX is most of the book, but it's none of chapter 6. So if you're just taking the IDFX exam, you don't need to read chapter 6 right now. If you're taking the IDPX, you definitely need to read all of chapter 6. And then also you can see all these other chapters you need to like re-study for, re-familiarize yourself with. And then the practicum is even, simpler. You're really going to be leaning on like means of ingress and barrier-free design. You're not going to be working on the practicum so much on contract administration, for example. So this is a really good tool. Some other resources. So this is probably the #1 question we get every time, which is about Q Practice. So Q Practice is not part of NCIDQ. It's a separate for-profit entity. They're very helpful and very popular, but also very expensive. So what I like to say is, this exam is already expensive. I don't want to encourage people to spend even more money on it when it's not critical. And Q Practice is not critical. But it can be very helpful in a few specific circumstances. People who have taken the exam a couple times and maybe failed one section and have a hard time with that, this might be the best way to finally nip that in the bud. If you have a really hard time managing your study schedule, if you have a really hard time with time management, Q Practice basically is gives you a whole course that you can it'll help you manage your time. If you do it for monthly, it's only $149. So I talked to quite a few people who sign up for the month before the exam to get last minute tons of practice test work in and just do that month. They do 4 months, which is kind of one test session, or you can do it for the whole year. Again, that's the entire price of the exam all over again. So it's pretty expensive. But if you have more than 5 people, they do a team rate. So you could check that out. I know a lot of people will share these lower level accounts, 2 people will share them, which I'm sure you're not supposed to do, but I'm sure it happens. Also, IIDA Northern California will be hosting a Q Prep session. We do that every testing session. This link in this presentation just takes you to the event page. It's not, this particular Q Prep session isn't scheduled yet, but it will, I don't think so, but it'll appear there in the next few weeks. It's probably going to take place in March. Study groups. This IIDA chapter doesn't facilitate a study group, some do, but a ton of people on that Facebook group are always hey, I'm in Raleigh and I need a study group, and people find each other that way. I'm sure virtually too, a lot of people are meeting. Lastly, a really good resource if you have a super weird question is inquiries@cidq.org. I've emailed them a few times and they're very responsive, really nice, super helpful. Okay, so we're going to look at, this is the part where it's on you now, so getting started. So we made a little to-do list of kind of the easy parts and the harder parts. So the easy parts that you can do right now are to make a NCIDQ account with all of your info, track down your school transcripts, because that does take some time, get those work experience forms filled out, or at least do the math to see where you fall in that, if you have the qualifying experience already, or if you know that you need 1 more year, for example. And then join that Facebook page right away just to watch the conversation on it. It's really interesting. I noticed there's tons of conversation happening about that new codes requirement this year on that page. And then when you're really ready, you will start researching and choosing your own study method, because it is going to be a little bit different for everybody. You'll read the reference manual, do your flashcards, example questions, practice tests, or you'll do that online study package if that's what you've chosen to do. And then lastly, I would say remember the rewards, which is kind of something that we lose sight of during the midst of that hellish study process. So I'm going to review some of those rewards real quick. One of them is promotion. A lot of firms require that people be certified or licensed or have this kind of exam in order to reach a certain promotion level. There's also an elevated salary bracket. I'm going to show you a graphic for that in a moment. It also demonstrates your commitment to design. That's a really big one I've noticed just in the design industry, in the community. People are pretty complimentary and excited for folks when they pass the NCIDQ exam, and people are usually pretty supportive of people studying. So it is just a cool, professional rite of passage. It gives you huge bragging rights, like I said. And then also it means that you will have a professional level IIDA membership. So like I said, you can put IIDA after your name instead of associate IIDA or student IIDA. And then it also helps elevate our profession as a whole. this is an example of that elevated salary bracket. So with one or more certification, people made on average $15,000 more than people with no credentials or certifications. So, you know, that's probably also because people who are getting certified are just on the ball employees and probably good designers. And it doesn't discriminate between like what kinds of certifications that you have, but NCIDQ is certainly like the most recognized and like the most relevant. So I want to talk for a quick second about that question about elevating the profession and why NCIDQ is an important factor for that, because most people just kind of think of NCIDQ as being like good for them personally. But one of the challenges we have in our industry, and I'm sure most of you have experienced this at this point, is the fact that interior designers have work that overlaps with both architects and decorators, and that makes people very confused about like what is the work that you do. So this graphic is pretty helpful for showing kind of the highly code regulated to the not so code regulated part. So there are things that we do that are not very code specific, like picking furniture styles. Then there are things that are pretty code specific that we do, like implementing the ADA and following sustainability codes and requirements. So it's not that we don't overlap with these folks, we do. We kind of run the gamut and everything in between. And then this section is kind of the things that commercial interior designers are doing that architects and decorators are probably not doing. So because we're responsible for the health, safety, and well-being of occupants within the buildings, we work in the code impacted environment. And that is something that we are saying all the time, especially at IIDA, to people who don't understand what interior designers do. I'm sure you all have been kind of asked or maybe talked down to a little bit about the work that you do, but you practice, if you're doing commercial interior design, which includes hospitals, hotels, retail, workspace, airports, museums, college campuses, school buildings, any of those places, as long as it's not a residence, you're working in a commercially code impacted environment. And that is what the NCIDQ exam is testing on. So interior design is actually a regulated profession. A lot of people don't think about that at first. This handy map shows how, where we are in California, that is we have a really unique situation. So we have a private certification with limited permitting. What that means, it's a mouthful. What it means is we have a separate exam that is not the NCIDQ, that is recognized as our certification. It's called the IDEX exam. And we won't get into it too much because it can be a long story. But the rest of these states, if they require permitting, if you can become a registered interior designer, which is sort of like being a licensed interior designer. Licensed, certified, and registered are kind of interchangeable terms for the most part. The NCIDQ exam is the one that's recognized in all of these states and in Canada. So in California, people tend to follow along with that NCIDQ exam. And the examination becomes a talking point for what kind of privileges people get when they become certified. So in California, because we have that unique situation, it's important to stay informed. So if you can text 52886, text interior designer to that number, you'll get some updates from IIDA occasionally about how our regulation in the state is changing or how it affects you. For a lot of people, it doesn't become relevant until later on in your career. But then at that point, you're like, wow, I've been in this career for a long time. I had no idea that I was a regulated profession and that that might impact how I practice. So I really recommend learning about this in advance. For the most part, like if you are taking the NCIDQ, you are already involved in, showing what you're capable of as a professional. And you want that test to be recognized, not just by your industry members, but by your state, and the states that you might work in the future. Lastly, I want to point out that IIDA is your advocate. So we advocate for your rights to practice at a national, state, and local level. IIDA has been involved in that for a long, long time. We promote the advancement of your career by providing resources, kind of like that NCIDQ reimbursement scholarship and also CEUs. Your local chapter provides you networking opportunities. I know IIDA Northern California has over 800. I think we might even be over 900 members at this point. We also have a new mentorship program, which I really want to highlight for folks on this call, because if you're in this stage of beginning to take the NCIDQ, you're probably in that formative place, or maybe in the place where you're looking for a little bit more in your career. And this new mentorship program can be a really good stepping point for that. I believe the current state of this is we have more mentors than we have mentees. So we need more mentees, and the mentors are a phenomenal group of industry leaders.
Laura,
also, you should join me. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you were just about to shout, join IIDA. For the mentorship program, I know a lot of you are probably here to advance yourself and your professional career. Even if you may not be looking right now for a mentor relationship, if you're looking for a way to be connected to people, high up the corporate ladder in these big companies, this is not just a way to develop a mentor relationship, but also to network in a powerful way.
Very well said.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. This mentorship program has been implemented similarly in other chapters, but the Northern California chapter just kicked this off in the last 3 months. So it's kind of in its inaugural session, if you will. So then, yes, join the IIDA. Again, I'm a broken record. Have your firm pay for that. I don't pay for my IIDA membership. I don't pay for my NCIDQ. It behooves your company for you to be an advanced professional. And most firms, especially if you're like an architecture firm, if they, provide AIA and ARE reimbursement, they should be doing the same for IIDA and for NCIDQ. Whew, okay, that was a lot of information. Thank you to everyone who held on through all of that. I'm sure we have quite a few questions coming in. I don't know, Adam or Sergio, if you want to.
Yeah, we can jump into it. My video is not working, but that's okay. Sergio and I can tag team some questions. I'll start. Okay. For everyone that asked if this presentation will be sent out, yes, absolutely. It should be in your email the next day or so. If the recording worked for this, because this was sort of our first time using the recording function, we can also send out the recording for you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Adam. I was going to say, sorry, before you do that, there is a Q&A section I'm seeing as well. So what we're doing now through the chat and reading out the questions that were put in the chat.
They both work, whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the questions we have is, do you need to meet the experience requirement prior to taking all the exams, or can you start them?
So you can start them. So you can take the fundamentals exam, the IDFX, without the work experience. You don't even have to have uploaded that form. You'll just want to go through on the website during the application process. You'll say, I'm just applying for the first exam. I think you can even start taking that exam before you've graduated, I want to say. So yes, you can start.
Okay, we have another question. What is, I mean, you may have already read this, sorry, I was scrolling through. What is the advantage of having the certification versus having an interior design certificate from college or universities?
So this isn't different, it's in addition to. So if you have a certificate from a design program, like an educational design program, then that, I think falls into the bucket of education. This exam really falls into the bucket of professional certification. So a ton of occupations have occupational exams. Like I mentioned, like accountants, teachers have exams. It's really, really common. And especially if you are in a career that can be kind of multifaceted, I think ours definitely falls into that, where you have engineers, architects, interior designers, landscape architects. We all have our own kind of specialty areas. And all of those other groups also have their own professional exams. So, engineers take a PE exam. So NCIDQ is the professional level exam for that. You wouldn't take that exam without having done any education, unless you had years and years of work experience, like some people who, entered the profession through an interesting way. I hope that answered that question.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, are the prometric testing sites operational currently? I think we already answered that for COVID-19.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. I'm currently a university student, and yesterday I had never heard of this exam. Is the exam not necessary for the industry? At what professional level is the exam required? Should I be aiming for the exam as soon as I graduate?
Really good question. Thank you for that question. So it is, I'm glad you've heard of it now through this session, required to participate in the industry. When you graduate, you get your first job based on, where you graduated and what your portfolio looks like. And that's true for everybody. It's highly unusual for somebody to be NCIDQ certified straight out of school. It's also not really necessary, because what people are looking for at that point, I think, is your potential. The NCIDQ exam helps show that you have sort of a technical foundation and a rigorous professional approach to your work, which is usually, probably most impactful a few years into your career. It basically tells people, like, I'm sticking around in this career for a while and I care about being good at it. So most people, I would say, take it somewhere between like 2 and 3 years of experience and like 7 or 8 years of experience. And there's a huge gamut there. Some people who have been in the industry for 20 years are taking it now because it wasn't something they heard about a long time ago, and it wasn't as common a long time ago. So they're taking it now in order to get that promotion or in order to reach like a principal status. And then in some states, I wish California was like this too, but in some states, once you pass that exam, you can become a state registered or licensed professional, and it can give you stamping and signing privileges in a commercial interior scope of work. So California isn't there yet, but for example, if you're in Florida, you can't be a licensed interior designer. You can't call yourself, I think they actually use the word registered, a registered interior designer, unless you've taken the NCIDQ exam. So that's when it really, if you don't have it, you hit a barrier of practice.
Okay, another question we have. Someone is planning on taking the exam in fall 2021. Are the materials relevant in this and that are available now going to be relevant for that exam this year?
Yeah.
I'd also say probably the CIDQ website is such a good Bible for what exactly is on each exam. I think they even break it down into like the percentage of content that you are going to encounter in each exam. So definitely take a look at that.
Yeah, and the exam has gone through basically every 5 years. There's like a group of professionals that sit down and review the exam and make changes and introduce new content, things like that. None of that is like ground shifting work. It's not going to be like in one exam, 30 inches was the correct answer and now it's 36 inches. They're not that mean. And the other thing they do is when they introduce new questions, they introduce them over a cycle. So that, like the IDFX exam is 125 questions. You're actually only scored on 100 of them. You just don't know which 25 are the pilot questions. Same with the IDPX. 25 of those questions you're not scored on. You just don't know. And they go through that a few cycles to make sure that those questions are, don't have like huge outliers or are strange. And so if there's new content being introduced, it is like, it's kind of phased over those questions. They do have periodic updates, like they have some new blueprints for the exams, which actually I can probably pull up real quick, that just summarize what is covered in the exam.
In the meantime,
Sure.
Is there remote online proctoring, or do the exams have to occur in person?
They have to occur in person. And I think that'll be true because they use that third-party Prometric site. They'll continue to do that.
Do you only need to study IBC codes, or will things like the NFPA come up in the test?
You only have to study the IBC codes. If there's any other specific like code related requirements, they'll be described in the textbook.
I can do another one here. Do I need to find a supervisor or sponsor to prove my work experience if I'm a designer as a freelancer?
Yes, you do. That's a really good example. So you won't have a direct supervisor if you're a freelancer. So you'll need to find a sponsor. And that, I think a lot of people use connections through maybe like where they went to school, like either an alumni or a professor who also practices, or somebody through IIDA might be a great place to find this person. You will need a sponsor if you're in a freelancer situation.
I also saw someone just put that Prometrics, they're the proctoring people for, all kinds of exams that are doing online proctoring. So I think the reason that CIDQ is not is because there's a whole separate process, and I think it has to do a lot with contracts for why they're not offering the online. It could also be that because it's only twice a year. Do you have a take, Laura?
Yeah, I would say it's probably because it's only twice a year. Also, CIDQ and NCIDQ tend to follow the AIA and ARE model, specifically because like the ARE is an exam that the NCIDQ is compared to a lot because we're in the same professional realm. I don't think you can take the ARE online.
You can, but they just launched it like a month ago.
Okay, yeah. So like if that's super successful and becomes the norm, then CIDQ will probably follow that. But I don't have any information on that happening anytime soon. It's certainly not happening right now. I'm going to share my blueprint real quick. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
See the IDF? Okay. So this is just on the website. They have one for each exam. It gives you some like fast facts about the exam, but it also breaks down the percentage of questions that fall into like these different content buckets. And then they tell you a little bit more about the content buckets. And these will be referred to in the study materials all the time. So I think this is a good way to give you an idea of what kind of content is on here. Reading this over won't help you answer these questions. It's just kind of for context. Hopefully that helped.
Okay, so I know I have to jump to a 1 o'clock meeting, so I want to do one more question.
Good.
It's best for last, of course. If we are using the mentorship program, what is some advice to best take advantage of that relationship?
I think that's going to have a little bit of a different question, a different answer for everyone. The way that this program works is you're automatically matched up with somebody, and then you kind of start the ball rolling in conversation from there. You can also like join different groups that have specific interests, like I'm really interested in computer modeling, or I'm really interested in furniture specification. And I think those can be like just collaborative spaces for communicating about those things. I would say the best thing you can do is to be persistent. A lot of mentors, they tend to be like higher up professionals. They get really busy. If they're ever like ignoring you, it's just so not personal. It helps them if you can be persistent, and not that you should have to initiate every interaction because that's a lot of pressure on you, but just, prompting them to help, like ask for what you need from them really helps them when they're so busy, like be most helpful to you, is kind of what I would say.
Hey, Laura, someone has asked if they can email you or Adam any questions after this presentation. Do you want to put your contact info in the chat so people can do that?
Yeah, I can put mine.
Great, thank you.
This is let's see. This is my advocacy email, so it doesn't say my name, but this one goes to me.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Sergio. We really appreciate it. Any closing marks before we head out?
Go punch that test in the face. You got this.
And make your firm pay for it.
Make them pay for it.
Thank you, everybody, for joining today. This was
Thank
awesome.
you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.